Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto trained under Anko and became Konoha's deadliest shinobi? Episode 2. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, Naruto's brutal training under Anko reaches a whole new level. As his strength grows beyond imagination, powerful enemies begin taking notice of Konoha's most dangerous rising shinobi. Now, let's start. The scene was far from pleasant. The crowd of jonin tensed at the arrival of the proctor, Mitarashi Anko. That is, most jonin tensed. Naruto did his best not to laugh his off at the sight of the cowering jonin as Anko proceeded to explain the myriad ways in which they could die in the forest. For a moment he could have sworn she was doing it for his entertainment. Once she finally completed the descriptions, one of the chunin with her brought up a large stack of paper. Okay kiddies, welcome to the second part of the chunin exams. This part is a survival test. You have 5 days to reach the tower in the middle of the forest of death. But, she trailed off, letting the tension grow, you have to bring a pair of scrolls like these. The Heaven and Earth Scrolls. Each team gets one of these two, either Heaven or Earth, and you won't know which team gets which. So, 5 days to get there with 2 scrolls, and should you have less than 3 team members or open the scrolls you're disqualified. 5 days. Cried an indignant rock ninja. What? Crunch. About food? Asked Choji, munching on his favorite barbecue-flavored chips. Most of the wildlife is edible. That's why it's called survival, Anko explained, her smirk never leaving her face. Naruto almost laughed when Ino smacked Choji on the head for being an idiot, as she put it, not considering for a second that food was actually quite a problem in missions such as these. Do we have a plan? Sasuke whispered the question, never moving from his spot beneath the tree. Nothing for now, but I think we should set up traps near the tower and take the others out there. Not a bad idea. Done. Naruto returned to his nap waiting for the chunin to reach his team. He once more considered his training with the fox. The style and sword skills he learned were excellent, but what was really important now was the ability to control the demonic chakra from his seal. Gaara was like him, except for the fact that he was somewhat psychotic. Sasuke, he added, drawing the raven-haired teen's attention. Naruto never called him by name unless it was important. Yeah, we should avoid the sand team, he said with a tone of finality, and while Sasuke believed him, he was still irritated by the fact that Naruto rarely shared his info. What, the redhead got you spooked? He asked in a more arrogant tone. Naruto immediately turned towards him, glaring. Sasuke didn't get the chance to react as he was faced by ice-cold blue eyes glaring daggers. They are dangerous, he shortly explained in a clot tone before dropping the subject. Sasuke shuddered at his voice, but accepted. The crazy blonde knew his stuff. The chunin stuck with paper duty soon passed the two of them by in past 2 forms. Death waivers. Naruto read out loud, and started to laugh, while those around him threw worried and scared looks at him. On the other side of the clearing, right next to the fence, Anko listened to Naruto's laughter, and grinned. Oh, she was certainly going to watch the events from the observation room in the tower. Whoever placed those concealed cameras was a genius, this is going to be fun. Listening to the growing noise of genin speaking to each other finally got her irritated. Pipe down brats. Get those papers signed and exchange them for a scroll so we can get started. Quietly obeying the orders of the scary woman, the genin quickly signed the waivers and went in teams of 3 to a small tent to get their scroll. The interior of the tent was perfectly covered, making it impossible to tell which team got which scroll. Team 7 walked over to one of the gates, namely Gate 41. As Naruto soon found out, the term, gate, was used rather liberally to describe the entrance. It was a simple section of the fence with a small metal plate, a red 41, painted on it. Naruto turned to his 2 teammates. Sakura in particular had grown during the past month or so. While she was still infatuated with Sasuke, she had by now focused on her training, and the improvement was quickly visible. Sasuke still wanted to kill his brother, that much was obvious, but had shed most of his holier-than-thou personality, or as some would put it, got the stick out of his. Quite a few people still tried to break what they thought was a genjutsu when they saw him laughing or smiling. What also surprised him was the fact that Sasuke, of all people, had an appreciation for his pranks. Although he rarely pulled them these days, he would still do something now and then as a token of appreciation for his friends. He still fondly remembered painting the Hokage monument and the utter failure of a full squad of Anbu operatives to catch him afterward. Perhaps he could do something like that again. Shuddering as he felt a chakra spike, he turned to notice a flare rising from the main gate. Team 7 jumped over the fence. The second phase of the Chunin exam had begun. Sakura Haruno was having a surprisingly good day, all things considered. First, she got up early, avoiding the annoyance that was her alarm clock, while also managing a warm shower and breakfast. Second, thanks to her recent training along with some help from her mother, who was a former ninja, she managed to prepare herself to the best of her ability for the coming test. Now, she was certain that she would not be a burden to her teammates, and perhaps finally catch Sasuke-kun's attention. What Sakura didn't know was that her day was just about to get worse as she entered the Forest of Death. Within the tower at the center of the forest, lies the observation room. Currently inside, was a collection of Jonin sensei gathered to observe their pupils as they perform. With them were a number of Anbu operatives, along with the two proctors so far, Ibiki Morino and Anko Mitarashi, whose presence instilled a bit of fear into the others. Apart from the Konoha nin, all others kept a safe distance, for Anko was not feared without reason. Although she didn't reach full Junin rank, her infiltration skills, along with torture and interrogation were trained by the two most capable minds that Konoha produced. Orochimaru, the Snake Sanin and Ibiki Morino, mental torturer extraordinaire. Add to that the fact that she was quite talented, and you got one tough as nails Kunoichi. Said Kunoichi was now eating a bowl of popcorn and holding another bowl filled with money. Why do you ask? 1,000 on Guy's team. 500 on the Sand siblings. 250 on Kurenai's team. And so on. The betting continued until most of the Junin had made a bet. All the while, not a single person stopped watching the screens that displayed various parts of the forest. One such screen displayed the first battle during the exam. On the eastern side of the forest, somewhere in between the tower and the fence wall, members of Team 10 cursed their luck. Shikamaru was busy dodging a rain of Senbon needles aimed at his vitals. Why did we have to end up fighting such troublesome opponents? Thought the lazy Nara, as he tried to come up with a plan to defeat their three opponents. He noted his lightly wounded friends Choji and Ino who were just behind him. Any ideas, Shika? Choji grunted, pulling out a Senbon from his arm. Ino parried a kunai send for the back of Shikamaru's head. Come up with something while we're still alive, will you? She quickly added, not taking her sights from her opponent. Yeah, I'm on it, Shikamaru added indignantly. He quickly checked his kunai pouch. That should be just enough. Ino, distract the guy with the weird mask. Choji, you're with me. Move. The team instantly scattered. With Ino. Over here you idiot. She yelled at the masked rain ninja. His response was to make 4 clones and charge her. Will you die already, girl? The nun asked, his 2 clones charging in while the 2 others jumped from above. Shit. Those are clones, but where is the real one? Not above, not in front, to the sides. She quickly checked both. Crap, the back. Turning at the last moment, she managed to avoid being skewered through the chest, but was still cut on the shoulder. Hissing angrily, she managed to slam the butt of her kunai between the mist nin's shoulder and neck, accidentally hitting a nerve, knocking him out. She thanked Kami for her luck. After quickly searching him, she didn't find a scroll. Recomposing herself, she turned back to her friends, and ran to join them. With Shikamaru and Choji, the pair stood back to back, barely managing to avoid the enemy's attacks. Ready, pal? Shikamaru asked, once more fending off a kunai trying to slash his throat. His enemy was skilled, but nothing special. He fought worse. Right behind ya, Choji answered. Suddenly, a small explosion was heard as a cloud of smoke enveloped them both, hiding them from the sight of the two, now separate enemies. Asa, can you see anything? One of them asked. He was met with silence. Asa, are you there? He asked again. Nothing. She won't be answering anytime soon. A calm voice came as a shadow streaked out of the cloud, running towards him along the ground. Loudly cursing, he tried to dodge the shadow, but was too slow. Shadow Possession Jutsu, success. Now Choji. The last sight the Rain Nin managed to see was an enlarged fist heading his way. After that the world turned to blissful darkness. Back at the tower. Not bad, Asuma, those brats of yours seem to know what they're doing, Anko commented on the performance of Team 10. They even got both scrolls. But they didn't tie up the nin nor did they gather any equipment apart from the scroll. Asuma merely drew a smoke from his cigar, trying his best to ignore a glaring kurenai on his right. That woman would be the death of him. Hey look! One of the jonin pointed towards a screen showing the southern part of the forest. Another fight, Kakashi idly commented, skillfully hiding a smirk at the fact that it was his team down there fighting. Anko made another mischievous grin, recognizing Naruto. This was going to be fun. Southern region of the Forest of Death, with Team 7. I still don't get how those idiots became genin, Naruto whispered to Sakura as the three of them spied on a genin team from the new village, Sound. Naruto vaguely remembered that there were two teams from that village in the exams, and this seemed to be the weaker one. The three male ninja walked cautiously, but their guard was down. They didn't notice their chakra signature. Okay, sit back and watch. You two got the last two teams, this one is mine, Naruto gleefully said to his teammates. The two looked at him and merely shook their heads. Show off, Sasuke muttered, while Sakura merely nodded. Naruto promptly ignored the comments, preparing three Senbon needles and closing his eyes. Ninja art. Hidden mist jutsu, he whispered, molding his chakra as a thick blanket of fog descended on the forest around him. Naruto found that he very much enjoyed using Zabuza's silent killing technique. Unbuttoning his trenchcoat for improved mobility and patting his feet with a thin cushion on chakra, he silently glided through the mist. The Sound Nin on the other hand were panicking. None of them could see further than the man next to them through the chakra-infused mist, not that they noticed the small detail. The leader of the group recovered first, and set them up in a triangle formation, each at the other's back, trying to leave as little space for their invisible enemy to attack unnoticed. Naruto grinned, standing in a stance that was eerily reminiscent of Zabuza Momochi, eyes closed. Not wanting to risk failure, he took his three Senbon needles and coated them with a small amount of paralyzing poison. He studied the three nin for a few seconds while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The leader, as he labeled him, was also the tallest of the three. He had a somewhat faulty stance, leaving a few openings for him to use. The others were even worse. Naruto smirked at the fact that he could probably take them down like Haku did Sasuke back at the bridge. His studies of anatomy brought on many benefits. He picked up a small pebble and threw it to the opposite side from the one he wanted to attack from, idly wondering if this small distraction would work. To his glee, it did, causing the three to momentarily turn their heads towards the source of the sound. Using the momentary distraction, he threw two of the three Senbon, each hitting a pressure point on his target's necks, knocking them out. The third followed only a split second later, tacking down the third target. Before they hit the ground, Naruto rushed in and took out the Senbon. The strikes and the poison would keep them out for at least a few hours. He really didn't plan on leaving any evidence of his skills unless he absolutely had to. The less his enemies knew the better. Buttoning up his coat again, he released the jutsu, the area quickly clearing up. Sasuke and Sakura watched in awe as their teammate stood above the three unmoving bodies of the sound nin, not a single scratch on him. He triumphantly held up a single scroll, marked, Heaven. Looks like our job here is done. Are they dead? She asked, her tone a mixture of curiosity and slight fear. Unlike her two companions, Sakura still wasn't completely used to killing. No, just out cold, he muttered quietly, let's get going. We really don't want to get caught now. Back at the tower, utter silence permeated the room as all present except for Anko and Kakashi stared at the screen. One moment there was a team of sound ninjas on the screen. The next, a cloud of mist covered the small clearing, followed within seconds by the sounds of three bodies falling to the ground beneath them. And finally the mist lifted to reveal Naruto Uzumaki standing on top of them, all three dead or unconscious, unclear which one it was due to the lack of blood or visible wounds on their bodies. What have you been teaching that boy Kakashi? Kurenai asked after she brought herself back from her shock. I only gave him ideas and suggestions, he quickly answered, so that only she could hear, his smirk now visible beneath his mask. Anko only stopped smiling to put some popcorn into her mouth, and Ibiki was no better, the disturbing smile on them both worrying all but a few. Her entertainment, however, was interrupted by the arrival of an Anbu operative. Anko-san, there is something you should see, he whispered to her, instantly gaining her attention. Lead the way, she replied, following the masked man. Back in the forest, night was finally falling, the sounds of day replaced by owls, crickets and wolves. In the small clearing around the stream where they now were, the full moon above them was clearly visible, its pale light illuminating the area. The members of Team 7 had set up camp near the stream, the area now covered with various well-hidden traps, courtesy of Naruto and Sakura, while Sasuke had prepared camp. Naruto was quite surprised and amazed at the traps Sakura had in mind, and some that she didn't know how to make, but he was more than capable. Never would have pegged you as someone good with traps, he chuckled, while Sakura smiled at the compliment. It's not really that hard, I guess, she humbly replied. Not hard. He stared in disbelief. Some of the stuff is crazier than the things I came up with to protect my apartment, and I spent days on those. You're good, but just lack some practical experience, he explained, careful not to overly praise her as he set up the last of the traps. Heaven help whomever tries to go through here. Back at the small campsite, Sasuke had brought out 3 sleeping bags and started preparing some of the food that Naruto had unsealed. Unlike the other two, thanks to the fact that he spent the last few years growing up alone, Sasuke was forced to learn how to prepare his own meals, and he took to cooking quite well. The small fire that he made gave off no smoke, a detail he remembered from survival training, and the small pot of stew boiling in it gave off a weak scent. The food was strong and nutritious, and surprisingly very tasty. The trio never let their guard down as they ate and chatted before Sasuke and Naruto dropped to sleep, leaving Sakura to cover the first watch. 8 hours later. Wake up, done, it's time for your shift, Sasuke not so gently nudged Naruto in the ribs. The blonde groaned and got up. Years of practice made him a very light sleeper, the threat of an or a mob made it rather easy. Muttering curses under his breath, Naruto crawled out of his sleeping bag. He was used to sleeping in his clothes, so there was little harm done. He put on his red coat, buttoned it up and took his watch. Quickly summoning 10 shadow clones, and promptly changing them into various forms of wildlife after placing them in strategic positions around the camp, Naruto quietly sat down, unsealed a small scroll containing notes on a jutsu he was studying along with a small canteen and started reading. It was only a few hours until dawn. Only a few hours before they would start again and head straight for the tower, but for some reason, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that something would go wrong. He turned his face to his teammates. Sakura was still asleep, but Sasuke was feigning. Can't sleep? He quietly asked, already expecting the answer. Yeah, Sasuke shortly replied. Ever since Naruto caught him during one of his nightmares, shivering, covered by cold sweat, he couldn't forget the look he saw in the boy's eyes. Fear. And he knew that there was only one person in the world who could do that to him, his brother, Itachi. What does it feel like? Naruto asked in a kind voice, to have a family. Sasuke, who in the meantime got up and sat against a nearby tree, watched him, his sullen black eyes revealing a mixture of emotions. Naruto watched him curiously, wondering what was going through the boy's head at the time. Safe, he shortly said, but Naruto waited, knowing that he wasn't done, loved, cared for. I'm not sure how to put it into words. Both smiled, and silence once more reigned over the small camp. It had been enough for the moment, as the two of them returned to watching the stars. Hey Naruto, he started, getting the blonde boy's attention. Why do the grown-ups hate you so much? Naruto tensed over instantly before Sasuke continued in a serious voice. I heard when they called you demon brat, monster and quite a few other things. Does it have anything to do with? He trailed off, not really sure he wanted to say the whole thought out loud. Sighing sadly, Naruto got up and walked over to him. Come on. I'll tell you everything, but not here. This is for your ears only. Sasuke nodded, and followed Naruto to the stream, away from a sleeping Sakura. Motioning for both of them to sit down, Naruto quickly drew out a small seal paper, an intricate seal painted over it. Pulsing a small amount of chakra, an invisible dome spread over them. Privacy seal, Naruto quickly explained to a somewhat bewildered Sasuke. Taking a deep breath, Naruto started. Before I tell you anything, you should know that all I say here is a S-ranked secret, that will get you executed should you reveal it without my or the Hokage's permission, understand? Nothing leaves here. Sasuke nodded in agreement. Tell me, what do you know of the Kyuubi no Yoko? He asked in a completely serious tone. You mean the demon that attacked Konoha 14 years ago? The one the Yondaime killed? Yes, and no, Naruto said, drawing a curious glance from the raven-hired boy. Kyuubi, and any other of the tailed beasts cannot be killed by mortal means. So, Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage settled for the next best option and sealed the fox inside a living container, a newborn baby. You, Sasuke quietly stated. Yes, me. And that's why they hate me, why I was beaten up more times than I care to count, why they tried to kill me, why I was insulted, glared at, isolated. Naruto quieted down, his eyes downcast. He failed to notice the sad smile that spread over the last Uchiha's face. Man, he started, drawing out the A. And I thought I had it bad. Stinks, doesn't it? Naruto added, a small smile crossing his lips as well. Yeah, the other chuckled. The conversation brought back unpleasant memories to Sasuke, especially of the night when his brother had killed all of his family, his entire clan. But what exactly had his brother done to him? Yes, he had left him alone. Yes, he had shown him the murders of his family. The fear of those events had receded over the years, even if the nightmares still came occasionally. He was treated like royalty by the council and by most of the village. He had everyone's acceptance, everyone's adoration. And what did his blonde friend have? None of it, and for reasons beyond his control. Naruto Uzumaki was Sasuke's first friend, and a man he knew he could entrust his life to. He remembered the day he first met him, when they were going home from school. His brother couldn't come, so since they were going the same way for a while, they spent the whole time arguing. He remembered how Naruto visited him the day after his family's funeral, how he tried his best to cheer him up even a bit. He would never admit it, but he managed to do it. Since they were placed in Team 7, they were rivals, always competing to show each other up. That rivalry had vanished as Naruto matured after their mission to Wave. Turning his observations to himself, he realized that he had changed as well. His two greatest objectives in life were to find and kill his brother and to restore his clan. But was his first goal really worth it? Naruto never returned the hatred they had for him. At first he wanted their approval, but now he simply ignored them. He would have to think about it more. Naruto had already turned off the privacy seal and went back to his scroll, still reading while Sasuke went back to sleep. He still had the better part of 2 hours to rest, and he didn't want to miss it. Naruto, however, wasn't studying his scroll. His thoughts returned to the conversations he had with Q. Are we getting nostalgic? Something like that. It's been a while since we sat down and talked seriously, Naruto thought back to his tenant. There really isn't much to talk about these days. Although we could start that new training if you're interested. Q trailed off, the thought of that training sending a shiver up Naruto's spine. After the exam, okay. I'd prefer to be alive for them. The fox chuckled at Naruto's comment. Q very much enjoyed messing with him. Deciding it was better to focus on his studies while he still had the time, Naruto one more focused on the complicated theory behind a new jutsu he was studying. Anko stared in horror at the three corpses before her. The three grass ninja were dead from poison and their faces were peeled off, completely gone. She cringed, realizing that there was only one person capable of doing this. Hawk, find the Hokage and tell him that Orochimaru is here. Also, get me an Anbu tracker team here, that bastard is inside the forest and on the move. Hi, Hawk, answered before vanishing in search of the Hokage. Damn it, Anko angrily whispered, why did you come back now, you bastard? Naruto flinched as one of his perimeter guards dispelled himself to bring him information. A single grass nin moving at high speed, chakra signature reminiscent of Anko, suppressed to chunin levels. Scent of snakes. All of the thoughts that currently raced through his mind were brilliantly summed in one word. Shit. He rushed over Sasuke and Sakura, but the two of them were still asleep. A second later, he and two of his clones carrying them vacated the clearing, heading straight for the tower. As they kept jumping, the two sleeping bundles awoke. Naruto. What the hell is going on? Sakura asked, still a bit groggy from her sleep. Naruto was completely focused on his current task, which was getting as far away as humanly possible from the scary chakra signature behind him. Unknown enemy with suppressed chakra brought to chunin levels. Most likely works for Orochimaru, he quickly explained, and he's after one or all of us. The last comment brought them all up. Everyone knew just who Orochimaru was. And that he meant trouble. They started moving on their own, while the two clones, joined by one other, went back hang to draw attention and buy time. The three men rushed as fast as they could towards the tower. Sasuke kept his Sharingan active even as he focused chakra into his legs to move faster. The plan and formation were simple. Get to the tower as fast as humanly possible. Naruto went in the back, with Sakura in the middle and Sasuke in the front. Naruto was nervous and scared. Orochimaru had sent someone after them either for Sasuke's Sharingan or for Kyuubi. Sakura was probably of no interest, but would end up being used as bait. None of the three possibilities sounded attractive, so the best option was to run. But the bastard, whoever it was gaining on them. The clone that dispelled had only gotten the shape through radiance without seeing the nin. And what scared him additionally was that there was something wrong about the body. It wasn't a henge, more like someone had an extra layer over his body. Think idiot, what did Anko say about Orochimaru's special techniques? He tried to remember, but wasn't fortunate enough, as the signature suddenly disappeared from behind him and appeared right in front of them. Naruto's face paled. Sasuke noticed this, and was worried as well. Sakura was nervous herself, because whatever spooked Naruto Uzumaki was most likely dangerous. He stopped, and both of his companions stopped with him. What happened? Sakura asked, but Naruto didn't reply. He simply pointed towards a small clearing in front of them where a woman with a large straw hat was waiting. Troublesome, Sasuke quoted the lazy Nara. On the other side of the clearing a certain person stood perfectly calm, studying the small team before him. He was greatly annoyed by the failings of his servant Kabuto. His capture had set his plans back considerably, but he didn't stop them. Orochimaru was no fool, in fact he was one of the smartest shinobi ever to come out of the hidden leaf. The three before him were interesting. The reports he had on the team reminded him of his own when he was a genin, but things had apparently changed. The girl, Sakura Haruno, was of little consequence, but the two boys were more than entertaining. The Kyuubi brat had a weak chakra signature, but the sword on his back was the Kubikiri Haucho, and he ran with that thing on his back without any problems. Kabuto's report had delivered the fact that the boy pulled a solo A-ranked mission, that he was proficient with seals. And while he found all that interesting and important, that boy was not his target now, and he seriously doubted that the fox inside would allow him to take over the boy's body, regardless of how good it may be. The one that interested him the most was Uchiha Sasuke, the last of his family still loyal to Konoha. The boy was reasonably pathetic, but his eyes would be of so much use to him. What do you think, Q? That definitely isn't a genin, Naruto asked his tenant, hoping for some advice, as he was at wit's end as to what to do. More like a, oh shit, the old fox cursed. I get it, we're mostly screwed, what else it knew? He made a mental sigh. That isn't a genin, I recognize his scent. Naruto considered what Q could have meant by that, but he came up with a blank. Anko, backed up by a team of Anbu trackers, was rushing as fast as she could through the forest, hoping to reach and stop her former sensei before more people died. Her companions shivered at the emotions that flared from her. Rage, sadness, loss, and finally complete and utter hatred. If they didn't know better, they would pity the poor bastard. But what they didn't realize was that there was one more emotion. Fear of loss. That kid is Orochimaru. After a while, Naruto Uzumaki had stopped counting the number of ways this day had gone wrong. He didn't dare ask the proverbial question, can this day possibly get any worse, for fear that it would actually happen. He was afraid of the snake Sanin, but it wasn't a paralyzing fear. All of his survival instincts had kicked in and his mind was working overtime to find a way out of the situation. His mind came to a screeching halt when the nun focused his eyes into theirs. In a moment, he felt himself die. A single kunai blade had cut his jugular artery, the blood seeping out like mad, and the poison acting, and then it stopped. He silently cursed, Genjutsu. The others were shaken as well, but he was the luckiest. My, looks like I caught a little fox, the grass nin said in a joking tone, an obvious edge concealed beneath the surface. Finally calming down, Naruto hoped that he could buy some time. From what Anko told him, Orochimaru was arrogant, he would most likely fail to see any of them as a threat, and his chakra was suppressed. A sneak attack perhaps. I never figured the great Orochimaru for a poacher, Naruto said in a mocking tone, his will barely holding together. His foe chuckled. You saw through my little disguise. I'm impressed. And you even have a sense of humor, the other replied, a single hand placed to his chest in mock surprise, that will make hunting you all the more entertaining. They all tensed as the nin took a step forward and started flashing through hand seals. Here it comes, Naruto idly thought as his day got even worse. Scatter! Naruto shouted as Orochimaru brought his hand to his lips and exhaled a large wave of fire. Naruto cursed at the fact that he was separated from his friends, but there wasn't enough time to think of such things. His eyes widened when he saw Orochimaru bite his thumb and smear blood on a set of tattoos on his arm, followed by a series of quick hand seals. The horrifying thing was that their enemy kept perfectly silent, a dark predator stalking his prey, gauging its skills, enjoying the sensation of the hunt and their fear and desperation. Naruto was painfully aware that this enemy was far beyond his skills. The only way to buy them time would be to trick him somehow, but that wouldn't be easy, as the clearing was covered with smoke. Oh shit, a summoning jutsu, Q rather bluntly explained. Naruto's reaction was delayed for just a split second, but that was more than enough for the massive sneak to leap from the cloud of smoke and try to swallow the unfortunate blonde. Luckily, he had just enough time to dodge. Swiped on the side by the massive serpent's scales, Naruto clutched his right arm, the numerous small cuts healing quickly, but most blocked by his bracers. So much for my coat. Thank Kami I decided to test these bracers. He dodged the swiping tail of the great snake, and leapt to avoid its bite. Orochimaru was nowhere in sight, but he could feel his chakra signature going towards what he was certain was Sasuke, so that's what you're here for. But, sadly enough, the gigantic snake had no intention of letting him help his friend. Growling, he summoned 3 shadow clones, while the snake brushed his other side, its sharp scales ripping through his coat and skin. But now, the scowl was replaced with a smirk, as all 4 instances of Naruto channeled massive amount of chakra into their blades, the shells shredding the bandage like cloth, before stabbing said swords into the body of the snake, unleashing all the built-up energy into its innards, completely obliterating it from within. The drain dispelled the clones, and Naruto used his limited knowledge of medical jutsu to fix up the wounds a bit, letting his healing factor take care of the rest. Now where did the other snake go? He wondered as he panted, trying to find any of the familiar chakra signatures, and smiled when he sensed a strong group heading his way. Jumping up to a nearby tree and heading off towards where he sensed Sakura and Sasuke, he once more focused his senses and prayed he would be on time. Sakura. The pink-haired girl loudly swore as she kept dodging blow after blow from a pair of clones of Orochimaru. She had been separated from both Naruto and Sasuke. The two waved their kunai, raining blows aimed at her chest, neck and head. Numerous cuts covered the girl's arms. Sakura appraised her options. Her genjutsu was utterly useless against them, she knew better than to even try. Ninjutsu. They're clones, they should be weaker than the real thing, right? What's the matter, little girl? You're not afraid, are you? The clone taunted as he swiped at her once more. Sakura deftly dodged the blow. Perhaps we should just kill you and go play with Sasuke-kun, the other taunted, getting a rise from her. Think, damn it, what did Kakashi-sensei say about fighting stronger enemies? What did Naruto say? She made a small smile as she remembered the blonde's words. She had prepared. Pulling out 4 of the prepared kunai from her belt, she prepared for her plan. She knew only a few water jutsu, as per her affinity, but that would have to do the trick, there was still enough water and moisture from the rain. She jumped back from the 2 clones, who instantly followed. She threw the 4 kunai, immediately following with hand signs. Water release. Water bullet, she cried, splitting the original bullet into 2 smaller ones, and firing them at the clones. She smirked as the clones dodged first the kunai then the bullets. She pulled the well-hidden ninja wire attached to the kunai as they spun back towards the 2 clones. The kunai, fitted with exploding tags, whirled around their necks, and promptly exploded, reducing them into nothing more than piles of mud. She smiled at her success and popped a chakra pill into her mouth, preparing to go after her teammates. Sasuke. At a fair distance from the others, Sasuke Uchiha was deeply concerned for his survival. The battle was not going well, or more accurately it wasn't going at all. Orochimaru was attacking and Sasuke was dodging, not even getting a chance to slip a single hit past the man's sword. He recognized the blade from the books he read. Kusanagi, the longsword of the heavens. A single cut from that poisonous blade could end his life, and so far, his clothes sported multiple cuts, but since they were quite loose, none of them nicked his skin. Just like a little rabbit, you try to escape from the one hunting you, Orochimaru chirped with a wicked grin that set fear into Sasuke's heart. What the hell is this guy? He thanked the heavens for the thick woodlands around him. Jumping from tree to tree gave his mobility a good boost as he leapt around, dodging blow after blow. Sasuke recognized the small stream as the one next to their camp. Sakura and Naruto had set up traps there. I could use them to my advantage. Rushing off towards the camp with Orochimaru in tow, he kept dodging the various jutsu-generated projectiles that Orochimaru kept sending at him. Just how much chakra does this maniac have? The campsite was finally in sight, and Sasuke smirked as his Sharingan allowed him to identify most of the traps. Now all that was left was to pull the enemy in, and spring the traps. Orochimaru charged in after the boy. He had already detected the traps, but was curious as to how the boy would use them. After all, it would do no good to have a weak and stupid body, now would it? Sasuke aptly dodged the blows from various traps around him, mostly because his Sharingan was able to see through them. Intentionally tripping a wire, he dodged to the right, as a massive log came crashing down, and almost hit the snake Sannin, missing only because of his unnatural flexibility and years of experience. Cursing, he waited for Orochimaru to get close, before simultaneously tripping two other traps, sending a rain of kunai and senbon needles at their location, while using substitution to get out of the way. A short grin replaced his scowl when he saw Orochimaru riddled with projectiles, but that quickly faded as he collapsed into a pile of mud. The process was repeated many times, each trap deftly avoided by the older ninja, who was constantly grinning. Sasuke decided to finally spring the last set of traps at the same time, as there were only 3 left. Drawing Orochimaru to the small clearing next to the camp, he used his kunai to cut the 2 wires, while pulling the third one with his hand. Orochimaru stood still as a hailstorm of projectiles now descended on him. He grinned. The grin never faded as Orochimaru dodged kunai, shuriken, senbon needles, explosive tags, rocks, logs and even a few larger boulders, and Sasuke was sweating and panting as they stopped for a moment. That was entertaining, Orochimaru said in a polite tone. Let's move on to the next phase of the test. Test. Sasuke wondered, but his thoughts were quickly interrupted when the snake Sannin started going through hand seals. Wind release. Great breakthrough, he calmly spoke as he exhaled a blast of wind. Sasuke used chakra to hold himself to the ground, but the wind started cutting him up in many places. But he still stood. What the hell is he doing? He acts like he's trying to kill me, but then he chooses weaker attacks. And he did mention something about a test. Not bad, little Sasuke, he said with a sinister grin, flashing through hand seals again and sending a large ball of fire towards him, but you're still no match for your brother. At that moment, Sasuke snapped. He was afraid, nervous, angry, tired, and that last comment simply broke the dam. The fear was gone, and so was the rage. The world stood still as he felt a burning pain in his eyes. The color from the world bled away, and 2 figures appeared before him. One was his brother, Itachi, the other was Naruto. Both had a sad look on their faces. You will have to choose a little brother, the figure of the older Uchiha said in a kind but sad tone. Naruto simply nodded. What is your choice? To lose yourself to your rage and desire for vengeance. To embrace your hatred of me. Or to let it go. The Naruto figure added. The choice is finally yours. Sasuke stood shocked at the situation in front of him. A moment ago, he was in the middle of a fierce battle, and now he was talking to what were probably the 2 most influential figures in his life. To embrace the hatred or to let it go. He thought as the 2 figures stood still before him. His mind raced through his memories. The day of the massacre, the academy afterward, the time with Team 7, the crazy picture the four of them took, where he and Naruto were scowling at each other while Sakura and Kakashi were smiling. He realized something. He wasn't alone. Even if he wanted to stop his brother, he wasn't alone anymore. And he didn't have to be ever again. And I called Naruto a dobi, he thought as a smile came to the raven-haired boy's lips. Thank you, he said to both figures, who in turn smiled back at him. The flood of emotions was gone, and color returned to his world. What he didn't notice was that the Sharingan of his eyes was swirling wildly, the two tomo splitting into a third. The world started moving once more, but everything seemed to slow down for him. He easily dodged the fireball heading for him. He could actually stand and study the hand seals that Orochimaru was using one by one. With a wide grin, he realized what was happening. On the other side of the duel, Orochimaru was considering whether to be happy or annoyed. He decided to settle for the second when the boy returned the jutsu he had just sent at him. Things were definitely not going according to plan. Then again, things rarely did in life. He made a smile, a downright scary construction on his face as his snake-like tongue hissed. Sasuke enjoyed watching the world in slow motion. The pull on his chakra was hard, but now it was much easier to dodge the attacks of his enemy. He watched the shadowy form of Orochimaru perform each action a few moments before the original, giving him just enough time to react accordingly. His chakra was too low for more than a few jutsu, but he had just enough to start using the gloves that Naruto made for him, or the wakizashi. Deciding to keep the sword sheathed, he started pulling out shuriken from the seal, each charged with a small amount of lightning chakra. Orochimaru raised a curious eyebrow at the action but kept throwing his own kunai at the boy, mixing it up with a few jutsu. Now Sasuke was even more sure that Orochimaru wasn't really trying to kill him. Pulling the 8 shuriken he had between his fingers, he prepared his jutsu. Fire release. Phoenix fire. He yelled as he launched 10 small fireballs at his enemy, who smirked and blocked them with his sword. Orochimaru cursed as he failed to notice the shuriken hidden right behind the fireballs, each passing just a moment after he shifted his guard. None of them dealt serious damage, but the small charge they all had messed a bit with his muscles. He also noticed a number of chakra signatures heading his way. While he could probably beat them, it wasn't worth the risk. Kukuku, looks like it's time I stopped playing around Sasuke-kun, he said, licking his lips in the process, which sent a shiver up Sasuke's spine. Sasuke tensed as his enemy charged at him, deftly dodging the kunai he started throwing as a last resort, hoping to at least buy some time. Naruto cursed as he ran. He could feel the others closing in, but now he could also see the damnable snake closing in on his friend. He almost tripped when he saw his neck extending and the fangs heading straight to bite the boy on the neck. Please let me make it on time, he quietly prayed, sending all the chakra he had into his feet. As he drew closer and closer, so did the head of the snake scanning to its victim. Anko, supported by a full tracker team of 4 Anbu, was chasing after Naruto's no longer suppressed chakra signature. But what she saw made her blood freeze. Sasuke was on his back a couple of meters from Naruto, who was lifted 2 feet from the ground, with Orochimaru's fangs stuck in his neck. She knew what it meant too well. A few meters away, Sasuke was lying on the ground trying to piece together what just happened. In one moment he was staring down into Orochimaru's yellow-slitted eyes as he brought his head forward to bite him. He was too exhausted to move when he felt a pull. In the next moment he was a couple of meters away from the snake Sannin, who was now biting Naruto on the neck. He dropped the boy's unconscious body to the ground, visibly displeased, before he turned, looking somewhere behind Sasuke. Anko-chan, it's been a while. What brings you here? Orochimaru asked in a polite tone. Anko's blood was now boiling. That slimy bastard had messed up another life, and it was the life of someone important to her. I'm going to kill you, she said in her sing-song voice, the emotions behind it enough to make even Orochimaru nervously twitch. Not overly fond of the idea of an unfavorable fight, for him, he decided it was a good moment to make a strategic retreat. Although I'd love to stay and talk about old times, I really must be going, he said in a mock-sad voice, dropping Naruto to the ground as he sank into the ground before Anko had a chance to reach him. The blonde boy lifelessly fell to the ground before starting to shiver violently. Sasuke, who had barely recovered from the events, got up and rushed to his friend's side, joining Anko, who was already there, and was soon joined by a tired Sakura. Anko was watching the area between the boy's shoulder and neck with a mixture of fear, hope and morbid curiosity as a strange seal kept trying to form, only to lose its shape. Naruto's mindscape. Naruto awoke to a great deal of pain as he entered the familiar planes of his mindscape. He had changed the area a long time ago, sickened by the utterly disgusting sewer. The vast plains before him were placed in an eternal twilight, the last rays of the sun giving way to the moon and stars above. He had shaped the land after the landscape from his visit to the south. In the distance glistened the golden light of the sun reflected in the ocean waters. In the distance the bluish rock of the mountains stood, cut off at the base by dense forests. His enjoyment of the majestic landscape was interrupted by another wave of pain. He shakily got up to notice two figures standing atop a large stone dais. The first was Orochimaru, sans his usual laughter. The second was one of his first friends. A regal man with crimson hair that reached his shoulders, dressed in a formal red kimono. His face was finely chiseled, bearing a calm and gentle expression, especially compared to Orochimaru's scowl. The only things that truly gave away the man's identity were a pair of red-slitted eyes. Kyuubi stared at his opponent, the two of them locked in a contest of will, each having his own plan for the boy. Kit. Q loudly called, if you would be so kind to get your hide over here and help me cast out this intruder from your mind and soul. Naruto quickly nodded and rushed over. As soon as he stepped on the stone dais, he felt the immense pressure of an alien will. But what was truly horrible were the whispers and images. He saw his home burning, himself on top laughing wildly as he stabbed Kakashi through the throat. Do you wish for power? He saw himself fighting off countless enemies without any effort whatsoever, his face skin and covered by strange black markings. Do you wish for your revenge on the weaklings who abused you? He saw the mobs that once tormented him brutally slaughtered by his hand. Power beyond your imagination, beyond your wildest dreams, and all you have to do is accept it. The voice kept beckoning, and he felt the pressure lessen in the moment he considered that option. But as he thought of it, another set of images came over. He saw Sakura crying over his shivering body, joined by a very worried and sad Anko, and Sasuke who kept yelling at him to wake up, his fear and sadness also obvious. He saw the moment of Haku's death on the bridge, the broken visage of Zabuza Momochi as he looked at who he wished could have been his son. He saw Iruka's smile when he placed his old Hittite over his forehead. He saw what could be his burial, the saddened faces of Sarutobi, Iruka and all those he knew. He saw when Sasuke took Haku's blows for him. He smiled. The choice was already made. There was never a question what his answer was. No, Naruto spoke to the image of Orochimaru in a cold, demonic tone. He may have held a demon's power, but he was no monster. He would never become one. His eyes focused on his enemy and he watched as strands of red chakra rose around them, encasing Orochimaru in a crimson sphere, before obliterating him. In a few moments, the dais sunk into the ground, leaving the two of them standing on soft grass. The person next to him chuckled. So much for the cursed seal of heaven, Q jokingly commented. Yeah, who would have thought that having the nine-tailed fox inside you would so easily stop it? Naruto quietly added, and received a smack on the back of his head. Hey, what was that for? He asked angrily, rubbing the back of his head. It wasn't me who stopped the seal kit. I kept it at bay, but it was you who destroyed the piece of Orochimaru's soul, and that stopped the seal from forming. He placed his hand under his chin. Kyuubi watched his container in deep thought, for a moment wondering what he was thinking of. I see, Naruto quietly added, the ghost of a smile present on his face. I think I just found a way to mess with Orochimaru. He chuckled, quickly joined by Q. After they both stopped laughing, Q placed his hand on the boy's shoulders. You are finally ready, Naruto, he said as Naruto smiled and the world faded to black. Campsite in the Forest of Death. Naruto blinked as he woke up to the unpleasant rays of light falling on his eyes. He saw the light falling through the canopy of leaves high above him, the bright sky concealed from sight by the ever-shifting branches. Soon the sight of the sea of green was filled with several others. The faces of people he knew were friends. Hey Gaki, Anko said with a wide smile. He smiled back as he noticed Sasuke and Sakura's relieved faces. Hey, he weakly whispered. His body felt like lead. How long was I out? About an hour, Sakura answered in a calmer but happy voice. Oh, he simply stated. The pain and weight of his body seemed to have reduced. He tried lifting his arm, and was quite happy to find he could almost use it normally. Hey done, Sasuke greeted him, with an unusual look on his face. He was smiling. Naruto resisted the urge to try and dispel the genjutsu as he knew that Sasuke had changed. He greeted back with a wide foxy grin. After that Sasuke's face turned serious. Thanks for everything, he quietly said, nearly flooring all present. Changes were one thing, but Sasuke still had a lot of the Uchiha pride in him, and that was about the last thing expected. Naruto smiled. What are friends for? He replied, offering his hand to the Uchiha, who gladly shook it. Smiling at the scene before her, Anko suddenly remembered something. She took a short look at the boy's neck and only found 2 small traces of bite marks, but no seal. Naruto had already figured out what she was doing, but decided to let her face go through several emotions, first surprise, then disbelief and finally happiness. Unfortunately for Naruto, there was no time to converse. I think I'll sleep some more, he quietly said as his eyes closed. For the first time in a while, Anko felt content as she watched Naruto's teammates carry him off towards the tower. The boy, no young man, was a wellspring of surprises, and she was glad that he was okay. Ignoring the surprised looks of the Anbu at her calm and happy smile, she returned to her duties. She wasn't overly worried about the other teams attacking them. If they survived against Orochimaru, they were strong enough to take care of themselves. Gather any evidence and break off, she quietly commanded, before leaving herself. The screens in the tower should have something interesting to watch. Within the Forest of Death's tower, on its final floor was a temporary office for the Hokage, a relic of times long past, but still kept in perfect condition by seals and workers. Inside said office, were currently all of the 4 Jonin sensei of Konoha's Rookie 12, namely Hitaki Kakashi, Sarutobi Asuma, Yuhi Kurenai and Maida Guy. What is this about Hokage-sama? Not to mean any disrespect, but our youthful students are being tested, and I am certain that both me and the others would prefer to watch, asked the normally jubilant Guy. Quite contrary to what most people assumed, Guy, once you get past his eccentricities, which were a defense mechanism from years of shinobi service, was a sharpen astute man, which was very visible once he was in battle, something which many of his compatriots forgot at times. Not that he held it against them. His question was met with a moment of silence by the aged Hokage. Guy-kun, the reason I called you here was because earlier today, Orochimaru was sighted within the Forest of Death. He slowly explained, steeling himself for the tide of questions that was about to come. To his surprise, the Jonin tensed but remained silent, waiting for him to explain. According to Anko's report, His primary interest was placing a cursed seal on Sasuke Uchiha, but was prevented by a timely intervention from Naruto Uzumaki. The entire team had managed to stand on their own against him. He pulled out 4 scrolls from the desk and placed them on it, right in front of the 4 jonin. These are the detailed reports on the incident. I want you all to read them carefully, because we might be facing war. The 4 jonin watched their Hokage fearfully. The idea of war was not something to be taken lightly. What are our orders for Hokage-sama? Kakashi asked in a serious voice. Slacker or not, this was no time for jokes. For now, observe. Look for spies and help your teams whenever possible. Should another of Orochimaru's agents be spotted, capture him. Alive preferably. Other than that, keep an eye out for anything out of the ordinary and for any perceptible weaknesses around the village. Dismissed. Now I can only hope that my foolish former student makes another mistake. Sarutobi thought as he summoned a few clones to do the paperwork and returned to reading his little orange book. The day had been too long. Back in the forest, Team 7 had hid themselves within a hollow tree. With sufficient space to hold a small camp and surrounded by a lot of traps, it was a safe haven until Naruto recovered, and they could proceed to the tower with both scrolls. Sasuke and Sakura kept watch on shifts while the others slept. It had been 8 hours already. Naruto should be waking up soon. What they didn't notice were 3 pairs of eyes watching them. The second, stronger genin team from the Sound Village, consisting of Kintsuchi, Dosu Kinuta and Zaku Abumi. The trio watched the genin team from a well-concealed position at a safe distance. There's our target, Zaku whispered, pointing at Sasuke. What about the girl and the unconscious one? Dosu asked, scratching his head. The blonde brat is down already, and the pink one isn't exactly all that tough. At the same time Sasuke was sitting back, acting asleep as he studied Naruto's sword. It was an impressive weapon, by all means. Even more so for the fact that he knew its efficiency firsthand, when it was used to try and kill him. Ever since they got back from Wave, Naruto had taken the time to help both him and Sakura with their ninja skills. He smiled when he remembered how much he had improved from his simple and easily applicable advice. His skills skyrocketed within weeks. How he was doing it all wrong before was still beyond him. And why had he helped him? Because he believed Sasuke to be his friend. He gripped the hilt of the sword and placed it next to Naruto's sleeping body, before returning to the state of being half asleep. Through his half-closed eyes, he noticed Naruto's hand move. Naruto had finally woken up after a long and rather rejuvenating sleep. He blinked at the natural wood above him, but just as he was about to move to check where he was, he felt 3 unknown chakra signatures. Silently cursing, he turned his head to the side and spotted Sasuke, and thanked Kami that his friend was watching him. He quickly got into a series of hand signals, the silent way of communication mostly used by Anbu operatives in the field. 3 signatures, unknown, high genin level chakra, 50 meters straight out. Call Sakura back here, he quickly signaled his friend, and was not disappointed when he did as asked. Hey Sakura, he quietly called, while waving to the girl to come over. Sakura quickly responded and walked to them, noticing the now awake Naruto, who told her, still using hand signs, not to say anything about him and for the 2 of them to start talking. He felt the 3 start moving towards them. Keep ready, I'm leaving a clone and dropping into the ground so I can attack them from behind, Naruto quickly signaled to the 2. 2 short nods, and Naruto grabbed his sword, and started sinking into the earth as a clone of himself appeared over him. Sasuke and Sakura were getting ready. Sasuke prepared his wakizashi while Sakura pulled out a scroll and unsealed pair of elongated kunai, made for close quarters, further enhanced by Naruto's seals. They both slowly walked out towards their enemies. Sakura calmed down, while Sasuke assumed his arrogant Uchiha look that he had perfected over the years, idly wondering what their crazy teammate had thought up for their opponents this time. Sakura on the other hand was in a much better mood than her companion. She was perfectly aware of her shortcomings, but after facing the snake Sanin, the trio that had been sneaking up on them was a joke. True, she didn't sense their chakra, but then again, Naruto always was in a class of his own. The two dueling kunai she had were bought a few weeks ago, and while she was decent with them, it were the enhancements that did the job. She trained her butt off so that she could use them properly. The sound nin watched the two walk out of their tree shelter, a smirk covering 2 out of 3 faces. The only one who wasn't smirking was Kin, who smelled a trap. Unfortunately her two teammates were overconfident, and she doubted that they would listen. Lord Orochimaru is going to kill us if we fail, she whispered to herself. Ignoring their calls as they stepped forward, she remained under the cover of the forest, planning to use her position to take down the target from a blind spot. However, that plan turned to be futile as she felt someone's hand on her mouth and a blow to the back of her head rendered her unconscious. Naruto never was one for wanton slaughter, although Kyuubi did tend to say otherwise, especially after the massacre on his mission to Kazashi village, and taking prisoners, especially after they muttered things about Lord Orochimaru, seemed to be a good idea. He shortly flashed towards his friends using his sword's surface as a mirror, and waited for them to take down their two enemies. Zaku, take down the pink one, I'm going after the Uchiha, Dosu quietly ordered, preparing to face his enemy. Unlike them, their weapons were directly attached to their bodies, Dosu's massive gauntlet being a prime example. Zaku on the other hand had his weapons placed directly within his arms, small, hollow tubes which, through the use of chakra, allowed him to fire blasts of combined air pressure and sound, in various ratios. Right, Zaku quickly answered as he prepared to take down the pink-haired girl in front of him. Unlike some foolish people, Zaku learned the hard way that there is nothing inherently weak about kunoichi, and that it was downright stupid to underestimate them just because of them. Straightening his arms in front of him, with his palms, Sakura watched the man curiously as she charged, looking for a weakness in his defenses. What she didn't expect was a blast of invisible force that sent her to the ground with a wide gash on her left arm. What the hell did he do? She wondered. She had noticed a wave of something, but was still uncertain. The two kunai were now fully charged with chakra, and she was ready for a brawl, if she could only get close to her enemy. Smoke bombs, she thought as a thoroughly evil grin crossed her features. In the other fight, Sasuke was doing his best to protect himself from the strange high-pitched screeching that he heard in his ears. His balance was failing him, and he could barely stand. Damn it, I can't fight him without the Sharingan. So much for testing myself, he mused, although he was well aware that conventional tactics were little help against an attack like this. Drawing his chakra to his eyes, he felt the immediate relief as his balance returned and the world once more slowed down, the color slightly bleeding from it. Now that he looked more carefully he could see the waves of chakra around him coming out of his enemy's metallic gauntlet. But his own gloves were no joke either. He quickly pulled out his blade, and channeled all the chakra he could through the gloves and straight into the sword, the cackle of electricity now loud enough to attract the other's attention as Sasuke charged his opponent, completely unperturbed by the sound waves that should have crippled him. His foe pulled out a couple of kunai and tried hitting him, but that was useless. The benefits of Sasuke's Sharingan easily outweighed whatever damage his enemy was capable of doing from a range. Now he only had to avoid being hit. Pulling the most out of his chakra reserves, he enhanced his speed, vanishing in a blur as he struck the metallic gauntlet. Dosu's one visible eye twitched for a moment as the surge from the sword entered his body, and the gauntlet began cracking. Dosu collapsed from the electrical shock with a wide bleeding wound on his arm. Naruto constantly watched the fight from his bush with a restrained Kin lying on his lap who was still out. Ninja wire combined with chakra suppression seals did wonders for restraining foes. The fights, as always, were entertaining to watch. He was mildly disappointed that Sasuke had to rely on his Sharingan, but was glad to spot the three tomo in his eyes and the rather creative use of the gloves he made for him. Now why didn't he think of that? Sakura was having a harder time, as she didn't have Sasuke's eyes to help her out. He watched as the girl managed to adapt fast enough to dodge the blows of air sent by her opponent based solely on his aim. He was impressed. 2 months ago, Sakura was still a weak fangirl who didn't use her sizable head for anything except for planning how to get together with her, Sasuke-kun. Now, the girl had turned into a competent, if not deadly kunoichi, capable of holding her own against stronger opponents. He was proud of his own interference into her training along with adding a few small pieces of equipment. Once more he was glad that he listened to his tenant's advice. Sakura dodged blow after blow from her opponent, using her clones to draw his attention whenever possible. She got a good idea and proceeded to use it. Since clones are nothing more than an image, she physically entered one, letting it leave a moment later. The point was simple. From her enemy's point of view, unless he could tell them apart, it was impossible to know which of the two was now the original and which was the clone. Zaku loudly cursed her wit as she kept using the clones to surround him, charging them all in and keeping herself at his back. He started shooting waves like mad, trying his best to finally find the real one when he felt a pair of blades stab him in the arms, completely disabling them before a third blow came to his family jewels, completely knocking him out. Once more smiling at his teammates' improvement, Naruto raised the unconscious girl, placing her over his shoulder as he walked out of his bush. His team was slightly winded, while he was in perfect condition without as much as a stain except for his shredded sleeves. One of these days, Naruto, you've gotta teach me how to sneak around like that, Sasuke jokingly said while sheathing his wakizashi. As soon as he deactivated his eyes, he felt the dizziness return in full force as he lost his balance and fell down, only to be caught by Sakura before passing out from chakra exhaustion. Nice work, Sakura, Naruto complimented her, while gesturing to her fallen foe. The girl smiled, and blushed for a moment. She still wasn't used to his genuine compliments on her skill. Naruto on the other hand walked over to the bandage-covered man and searched him for a scroll. Finding both a scroll of earth and heaven, he pocketed them. Noticing Sakura watching him with a bit of curiosity, he decided to explain. Less competition later on, he shortly stated before summoning a 3 clones. Once more Sakura watched him in surprise, even more so when one of the clones picked her up, bridal style, along with another who picked up Sasuke and the third held the girl from the sound team, while the original grabbed his sword and started going for the tower, easily followed by the other 3. As they went more towards the tower, the forest turned thicker, and thicker, forcing them to go along a much longer path or cutting through whenever possible. After about an hour, his female prisoner finally woke up, trying to free herself, until she realized that she could neither move nor use her chakra. Don't even try it. The boss has a few questions for you once we reach safety, the clone carrying her quickly explained. Seeing no option for escape, Kintsuchi resigned herself to her fate. Not very far from the tower, Naruto decided it was time to set up camp and do some light questioning. The others aside from his prisoner were asleep. He slowly walked over to her, all the while studying her expression. She was afraid, but of what he wasn't all that sure. Perhaps she'd be willing to reveal a few pieces of information. He summoned a few clones to keep watch before sitting down in front of her. She glared at him defiantly, but something about it seemed out of place. Considering the entire situation, he started the preparations. Pulling out a blank seal tag, he quickly formed the seal for a silence barrier before activating it. A near-invisible barrier formed a dome around them, snuffing out all sound coming from the outside. After that, he pulled out a set of Senbon needles, sticking one into a pressure point of each of her limbs, paralyzing them, before cutting off the ninja wire used to tie her up. Once more checking the chakra suppression seal, he calmly sat down. Inside he was sickened by what he was about to do. He didn't enjoy the idea of interrogating someone by using fear, but he knew just how important this information would be. We can do this the easy way. I ask a few questions, you answer them, and if I'm content I'll let you go as soon as we reach the tower, he said in a polite but firm tone. And if I won't? The girl asked, speaking for the first time, mostly because her gag was finally removed. Naruto's face darkened. Suffice to say that it won't be pleasant, he retorted humorlessly. Kin swallowed hard, while the young man in front of her was supposed to be a genin. Everything about him screamed experience and skill. And she was perfectly aware that her life was completely in his hands. No one would comment if she suddenly turned up dead, and he'd spared her life once. How do I know you won't kill me as soon as I tell you anything? She asked, now visibly afraid. Naruto chuckled. You don't, he said, instantly turning serious, but what you do know, is that if you don't cooperate, I could leave you here paralyzed and bleeding for the beasts to play with. Naruto had no intention of doing so, however. He could only hope that his threats would be enough. Laced with a bit of killing intent, so far they seemed to work. Kin, after deliberating her options, perfectly aware that Orochimaru would kill her when he found out she was caught, and that would be if she was lucky, decided that she might at least make the bastard's life miserable. For starters, what is your name? He asked in a firm tone. Kin Tsuchi, she quickly replied, with her head down, watching the ground. Naruto made a sad smile. She was now almost broken, but he wouldn't allow himself to cross that threshold. Looking back at the small fire he had set up, he pulled the instant ramen cup which was now properly heated. Are you hungry? He asked in a much kinder voice. Kin looked at him in a mixture of surprise and disbelief. She nodded. For a moment he wondered whether his next decision was wise, but he decided to do it anyway. Without chakra, she wasn't a threat. After pulling out the needles from her arms and quickly healing the area, Kin's arms were once more free to move. Without a word he handed her the cup of ramen along with a set of chopsticks. Enjoy, he said with a small smile as the girl first watched the food suspiciously, before giving up her suspicions and wolfing it down. Naruto took the time to analyze her and gather in his mind the questions he meant to ask. Kin Tsuchi, genin of Otogakur. Skills at mid-chunin level, focused on Senbon needles, had needles attached to ninja wire with bells. No other apparent skills. He finished the first analysis, so, what I need to ask is about Otogakur, its unknown leader, and why she is afraid of Lord Orochimaru. Not exactly easy questions. And if she's working for him, why doesn't she have the scent of snakes like Kabuto? Kin had finally finished her short meal, laying down the cup on the ground, before lying down with her back on the tree behind her. She seemed a bit more relaxed than she was before, but fear was still present. Then he noticed a detail that worried him. The brashness and the attitude were a mask, much like his. She was afraid. Now, let's get back to the questions, he kindly said, but his voice still kept its firmness. Kin spent what little time she had studying her captor. While very serious, and ridiculously strong compared to her, he seemed like a kind man. Perhaps she'd get a painless death. It seemed that would be most she would get. It would be a blessing considering the alternatives. What do you want to know? She asked in a defeated voice. What can you tell me about the leader of your village? He asked while grabbing his cup of ramen. For a moment Kin sat silent. Under threat of death. I'm dead anyway. The leader of Otogakur is Orochimaru, she explained in a calm tone. Naruto on the other hand spat out the ramen he was eating. That was unexpected. So, Orochimaru, as Otokage, sent a team to shut down someone in my team, while he was present here himself. Sasuke, he planned to put that damnable seal on him, and then the team he sent would have been a test for his newfound power. Just how much of a manipulative bastard can one man be? Regardless, I have to get this information to Gigi. But how? Surprised, Kin asked. Quite, he said after recovering. He was thankful that he didn't spill any of the ramen on his clothes. That would have been troublesome. What was your mission? He continued. To spy during the exams and to take out Sasuke Uchiha. Penalty for failure? He asked again. To be used as a subject in Lord Orochimaru's experiments. As Kin spoke, she shuddered. Even Naruto felt a shiver go up his spine. And he thought that this was too much. He sent his subjects to a certain death either way. To hell with it all. I may be a fool for doing this, but I can't let her just die like that. But how to persuade the old man? He paused his train of thought for a moment, considering the possibilities. That's it. Information on Otogakure and Orochimaru in return for asylum. The old man would probably accept that. I might have an offer for you. Very few people in the observation room of the tower were surprised that Konoha's Team 7, under the tutelage of Kakashi Hatake, was able to safely arrive, carrying no less than 4 scrolls and a prisoner. The last bit surprised most of them, but they had to admit it was an acceptable tactic to reduce enemy numbers. Out of all present jonin, Kakashi was especially proud. He had seen his team change from a bunch of brats into a more than capable group. The 3 clones of Naruto following the original had finally arrived in front of the tower. The ancient edifice before them inspired awe in the young man. He smiled at his now sleeping companions and prisoner. The young woman had some interesting information he was sure Anko and Ibiki would kill for, or do something even more unpleasant. He would have to talk about it to the old man. He was certain he could convince him to do something. Walking into the tower, another thought occurred to him. How many teams did manage to get here? 12 o'clock, Konoha, Anbu headquarters, office of the head of torture and interrogation. Ibiki Morino was having a field day and sporting an uncharacteristic grin which made sure that most of the Anbu kept a safe distance. First, the kid that Anko was talking so much about had brought them in Kabuto Yakushi, and the poor bastard didn't even know that he was a spy thanks to a well-concealed seal on the back of his neck, and not even a mind reader from the Yamanaka clan was able to dig out anything. Unfortunately, none of them knew how to break said seal, although he did make several copies, planning to give one to Wonderboy, as he kept calling him much to Anko's chagrin. The second thing that made his day was the fact that the same kid brought another person to feel his tender skills. Now, he was seriously considering buying the kid a drink, or at least dropping by to watch the remainder of his matches. Those should be fun, he idly thought as he sealed up his set of torture instruments. Going through his mental checklist, he finally turned off the light in his office before proceeding to the prisons of the tower. 1400, the tower in the Forest of Death. Much to his endless pleasure, Naruto was finally able to rest. Kin was now held within one of the tower's prison cells, awaiting the arrival of Ibiki Morino and Hiruzen Sarutobi for her interrogation. Sarutobi, while hesitant, was willing to offer the girl protection in return for all the information she could give on Orochimaru. And to his growing surprise, Ibiki had asked for him to be present. Something was bugging him though. Since the moment he woke up after the battle with Orochimaru, his chakra has been off. Resigning to figure it out later, he returned to his observations. It was time for practice. Sitting down behind the railing, he closed his eyes and focused on distorting the shape of the field of radiance so that he could reach the door. He was very much glad to find it was not nearly as hard as he expected. Idly monitoring from his hidden perch on the first floor, he gazed at the teams that were arriving. One such team was Team 8, consisting of Kiba, Hinata and Shino. Trackers, he reminded himself, his mind racing through all the information he could gather on them. Kiba Inuzuka, clan heir of the Inuzuka clan, partnered by the nin dog Akamaru. Specialty tracking and clan taijutsu techniques. No ninjutsu or genjutsu. Brash, arrogant, but very loyal and dedicated. Shino Aburame, another clan heir. Uses kikai beetles which feed on chakra, leaving the host's body very low on it, and incapable of using chakra-consuming jutsu, but capable of using the beetles for various clan techniques. Specializes in Rakan, tracking and clan techniques, mostly stoic and withdrawn but highly intelligent and loyal. And finally Hyuga Hinata. Taijutsu specialist, using the gentle fist style and wielder of the Hyuga bloodline Byakugan. Shy, withdrawn and has confidence issues but fiercely protective of her friends and family. Also has an apparent crush on me. The others walked in a well. Team 10 under Sarutobi Asuma, the Ino Shika Cho trio, just like their parents before them. Decent level of skill, but nothing special. Out of the three, Shikamaru Nara was the one to be feared for his intellect, which he was more than willing to use should the situation call for it. At other times he was a lazy bum. His control over shadows was his strong point. Ino Yamanaka, a mindwalker like her father, is dangerous, but not overly so. Another fangirl apparently. Choji is probably the strongest out of our generation, a pure taijutsu expert. Despite his usually calm attitude, he is not to be underestimated. Two interesting teams. Naruto silently mused, well, best get going. And that he would have done had he not seen something that provoked his curiosity. One of the sleeping rooms had its door open, and inside was Gaara, lying on his bed curled up and crying while whispering something. He reminded himself that he was probably the most dangerous of all of the genin present at the exams, so a little espionage could be of use. Putting a bit of chakra into his ears, he leaned on the wall just far enough so it wouldn't seem that he was spying and focused on the boy's voice. The memories, the blood, he whispered in a scared voice, before it stopped, only to be replaced by maniacal laughter. The laughter that would have made Orochimaru cringe in fear. What happened to him? He sadly wondered, shaking his head. He decided it would be wise to check up on his team before going to the cells. Making sure that his teammates were okay, Naruto started climbing towards the higher levels of the tower where the prison cells were. The dark stone of the corridors lent a depressing feeling to the whole place, but the lighting in the form of faintly glowing seals was something that he found very interesting. Idly running various theories through his mind as to how the dead were done, he didn't notice that he reached the prison until he bumped into the back of a guard. Watch where you're. Oh, it's you, Naruto. Naruto raised his head only to be met by the porcelain mask of Cat, otherwise known as Yugao Azuki. Hello, Cat-san, he replied in a friendly tone, minding her mask. Is Ibiki here? Hi. Go right in, she quickly replied, letting him through into the interrogation room. The small room that Naruto now found himself in was simple. Stone floor, stone walls, and only a lamp to give light. In the middle was a single wooden table and 4 chairs. In one sat Kintsuchi, in the other across from her was Ibiki Morino. On one side was Hiruzen Sarutobi and on the other an empty chair awaiting him. Sarutobi smiled in greeting, while Ibiki merely stared at Kin. Naruto kept quiet and sat down on the free chair. The tension in the air was palpable as the predator stared down its prey, although from the way the two were looking at each other it wasn't really sure which was which. Thankfully, said tension was easily broken by the loud sound of a door being slammed into place, courtesy of Yugao. Sarutobi coughed, drawing the attention of all 3 present to himself. Naruto was surprised at what he saw. Gone was the kindly old man that he loved as a grandfather. In his place was the professor, the god of shinobi, the 3rd Hokage in all his might, a veritable titan whose indomitable will imposed itself on whatever dared go against him and whose cunning intellect made enough calculations within a moment to make a Nara weep in jealousy. Naruto's reaction was a mixture of surprise and awe to what he had seen. He knew that inside there was still care and kindness, but he was once more the legend that had struck fear into the hearts of Konoha's enemies. He couldn't help but grin. "So young lady, are you willing to cooperate?" he asked in a stern voice laced with just enough killing intent to show how serious he was. "Hi," she quickly replied. However, unlike before, there was a hint of hope in her voice. "I see. Ibiki here will be in charge of your questioning. He will make sure that all you're telling us is the truth. If we are both pleased, you will be placed on probation for 3 months and after that, accepted as a citizen of Konoha. If you're still willing to be a shinobi, you will also be offered a position." "Fair. Hi. More than fair. Good. Now Naruto, I expect a full report on the incident as soon as this part of the exams is over. Ask Kakashi for help on it." Sarutobi quickly explained before getting up and leaving the three of them behind. Naruto got up to leave as well, but he felt a strong hand pushing down his shoulder. "Stay for a few more minutes," Ibiki shortly said in his usual gruff voice. "There's something I want to talk to you about." Nodding to the scarred man, Naruto sat down. Kin on the other hand just kept silent through the whole ordeal. She had a chance. She could actually stay alive. So much for the Leaf Nin being heartless bastards as Orochimaru put it, she happily mused. Ibiki pulled out a small paper and passed it to Naruto. "Look at it later, then tell me if you can break it without killing the person it's on," he explained. Naruto barely noticed the minute tone of annoyance in his voice, annoyance at the fact that the thing on the paper was beyond his skills. Naruto nodded once more, and placed the paper into his pocket. "Now that that's settled, take a seat and let's chat," Ibiki finally added, his face turning expressionless as he returned to his job. Naruto sat on his chair, and let his additional sense do the job of reading them as he closed his eyes. Sasuke woke up to a splitting headache. Loudly groaning, he opened his eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling and an even more unfamiliar bed. He turned to his sides and noticed 2 more beds in the room, on one of which was Sakura, peacefully sleeping. Rubbing his aching temples, Sasuke slowly got up. Taking a short look around, he noticed all of his equipment carefully sorted on a chair next to his bed. Sakura's equipment was similarly sorted and Naruto's was mostly missing, except for his red coat which was lying on the 3rd bed. "So he brought us here and walked off. Typical," he grinned. This was probably the tower, and since they had not 2, but 4 scrolls, he was pretty sure they passed. Well, perhaps taking another nap might not be such a bad idea. Within his temporary office, Sarutobi once more grumbled at the sheer amount of trouble the exams brought up. However, the whole mess had its brighter points, and Naruto was the one responsible for most of them. He pointed out a spy during the first phase of the exams, and brought in a very useful source of information during the second. Now that his former student Jiraiya was here as well with additional information about a possible invasion, he had all the information needed to stop Orochimaru before he got a chance to do something. But there was a bit that seriously annoyed him. One of his Anbu caught going for Naruto. Under Ibiki's tender mercies, it took him no longer than 15 minutes to spill his guts as to who paid him. It was definitely time to remind the civilian council just who ran this village. And he had such devious ideas. For the first time in months, Naruto felt truly tired. Having climbed up the outer walls to the roof of the tower, Naruto watched the night sky, the thousands of stars even clearer now that he was away from the village lights. The silvery sphere of the full moon cast its light on the troubled boy as he gazed at his right palm. Within it, placed over his oath scar, was a simple medallion, a silver snowflake attached to a simple silver chain, a parting gift from a friend. If one looked closer, he would see tears welling up in the boy's eyes. Beside him lay an oversized sword, its surface glistening in the moonlight. Sighing sadly, Naruto returned the necklace to its rightful place around his neck and lay down to watch the stars one more time, trying hard not to think of what he had learned during the interrogation. The news was disturbing, but then again, his world was not one known for maintaining the sanity of its inhabitants. One other thing, or rather, a person returns to his thoughts constantly. He made a small smile as he thought of her, but decided that as much as he enjoyed it, it really wasn't the time for daydreaming. His thoughts once more returned to the matters at hand. Now that the old man knows, what do we do about it? He asked no one in particular, before sighing again. He really did the too much these days. There were better things to do, such as working on his seals. A devious smirk crossed his lips. He still had 2 days of free time. Time skip. 3 days later, the end of the second part of the exams. 8 o'clock, tower in the Forest of Death, ground level. It was finally time. The test ended with a grand total of 8 teams reaching the tower in time. The remaining 16 teams were either dead, late or gave up. All of the Konoha rookies were there, teams 7, 8, 9 and 10. The Sand team was there as well, joined by a single team from Mist and Stone, and much to Naruto's surprise, the team from Sound that his team personally dismantled. He smelled the old man's interference in that, but he always knew what he was doing, these days more often than before. He threw a curious glance at the cage booth, where he spotted an unusual figure at the Hokage's side apart from Anko. A large man, with long spiky white hair and red markings beneath his eyes. Thanks to his recent studies, he was a bit more aware of Konoha's finest. That's Jiraiya the Toad Sage. Wonder what he's doing here. He also noticed an unnaturally large grin on the old Hokage's face. His further musings were interrupted by the arrival of a man in a chunin vest, another proctor for the exams. The 24 remaining genin instantly calmed down. Greeting, cough. My name is Gecko Hayate, and I will be the proctor for this part of the exams. Before you can proceed, cough, to the third part of the chunin exams, there will be a round of, cough, preliminary matches, according to the rules. The screen, he points to a large screen on the wall behind him, will show the pairings. At that point, names started flashing over the screen until it showed a pair. Inuzuka Kiba vs Rock Lee. Everyone, cough, except the 2 contestants leave the arena. The other genin quickly evacuated the arena, climbing to the stands that surrounded it. Naruto decided to watch this battle very carefully. Lee maybe was unable to use chakra, but he was a taijutsu prodigy, something that he himself couldn't claim. Kiba on the other hand wouldn't be as much of a problem. Hayate stood back as Lee and Kiba stared each other down. This is going to be an easy one, Orochimaru. That's the guy who can't even use chakra, Kiba jokingly asked, while his dog barked in response. Naruto made a mental note of the fact. Lee merely laughed before replying, let's have a good match. Begin. Hayate shouted before jumping back. Let's go, partner. Kiba shouted and dropped into his stance, hands on the floor in a half-crouch. Akamaru jumped on his back, in preparation for his family's jutsu. However, Lee wasn't going to wait for Kiba to finish his jutsu and instantly charged him. Not bad Kiba-san, but you're too slow, Lee added as he slammed his fist into Kiba's face. Kiba loudly cursed as he flew back and slammed into the wall. Kiba picked himself up from the rubble, and his canine partner quickly joined him. Without stopping for a moment he pulled out a number of smoke bombs. Lee once more charged, planning to stop him, but it was too late. Kiba had already dodged, and only his voice could be heard from the smoke. Man-beast clone. He shouted the name of the first jutsu, immediately followed by the second, four legs jutsu. Lee jumped out of the smoke, and stood perfectly still in his stance, awaiting Kiba to come out. The smoke cleared, and Lee was surprised to see not one, but two completely feral-looking copies of Kiba. Unlike Lee, however, Naruto, along with several others, didn't fail to notice that Akamaru was nowhere in sight. Just as Lee was about to attack, his two opponents leapt, shouting, dual-piercing fang. Much to his dismay, Lee found out that he could only dodge the two figures spinning at high speed, bouncing off of every surface they came into contact with. Come on, how long can they maintain this? He mentally asked himself, as he kept dodging blow after blow, waiting for a good opportunity to strike. Up in the stands, Kurenai was slightly worried for her student. Guy was not one known for doing training halfway, and because his team had a full year's advantage over hers, Kiba could be in a lot of trouble. As for Guy, he was merely smirking at his student's patience. He has improved a lot. He watched him wait for just the right moment before he slammed his foot into one of the tornadoes, apparently Akamaru, as he poofed back into a dog as soon as he hit the ground. Damn it, Kiba shouted as he stopped right next to a whimpering and heavily bruised Akamaru. Sorry boy, he said in an unusually gentle tone as he lifted him, never dropping his guard in the process. Lee waited for him to finish whatever he was doing. Unlike some, he had a very good idea of what the term camaraderie meant. This was a test, no need to do more harm than necessary. Kiba gritted his teeth. He underestimated his opponent. Rock Lee turned out to be a lot stronger than he expected, and he wasn't skilled enough to fight him and win, and now because of his mistake his partner Akamaru had been badly hurt. With him he might have stood a chance, but like this. Unless we both take one of the pills. Single quote. What do you think, Akamaru? He whispered to the pup, who growled in response, causing the Inuzuka heir to make a toothy grin. Right boy. On the other side of the arena, Lee noticed that something was about to happen. Kiba and Akamaru both got up and Kiba pulled out a pair of small bluish pills, popping one into his mouth and tossing the other to Akamaru. He charged towards the duo, planning to take them out before they had a chance to do whatever they planned. Kiba smirked. Good thing I kept a few more smoke bombs stashed, he thought, throwing all of them to the ground. The thick cloud covered the minor changes that came over him and the not-so-minor ones that came over Akamaru, such as his now blood-red fur. This time around, Lee charged straight into the cloud. He couldn't find either of them. Kiba was grinning wildly as he and Akamaru both easily dodged Lee thanks to their sense of smell. The bowl-shaped boy's scent was so easy to follow it was ridiculous. I have to thank Naruto later on for all those pranks we pulled, he thought as he started the next phase of his plan. Within the smoke cloud, Lee was now battered by even faster attacks than before. As much as he kept blocking, there was no way to keep it up with both of them like this. Sensei! Lee shouted. A lot of people turned to Guy, who was now smiling. You have my permission. Guy shouted back, and within seconds a loud thump was heard from the smoke cloud as cracks extended from it. Kiba's entire team was now worried. I'm sorry to say this, Kurenai-san, but your pupil doesn't stand a chance now, Guy said in an uncharacteristically serious tone. Kurenai sighed sadly, well aware that he was right, but still hoping that he would somehow win. Back in the arena, Lee vanished, moving at such speeds that the smoke dissipated. Kiba and Akamaru stood back to back, claws ready to strike their ridiculously fast opponent. This time, Kiba was on the receiving end of Lee's strikes. Leaf rising wind. Lee shouted as he slammed his leg into Kiba's face, launching him into the air. He quickly followed the strike with a leap, rising above Kiba before slamming him down with his fist into the gut. Moments later, Kiba crashed into the ground, leaving a small crater, alive but almost unconscious. He looked at the proctor, who simply nodded. Akamaru had returned to his normal form and was nuzzling Kiba's hand, whimpering sadly. Winner Rock Lee! Hayate shouted, only to cough afterward. That was a good fight, my youthful friend, Lee respectfully said while helping Kiba up, supporting him on the shoulder as the medics arrived to pick him up. Damn! Kiba weakly muttered, I wasn't even close. That's nothing some training can't fix, Lee said happily. If you're willing, I can help you out once the exams are over, he added cheerfully. Kiba watched his former opponent in disbelief, before smiling himself. That would be cool, he laughed back while they both left the arena. Up in the stands, both Guy and Kurenai were now smiling at the pair. As soon as the arena was cleared, the screen started going through names again, only to stop at the next pair. Sasuke Uchiha vs Mikashi Tokai. Will the contestants please step down into the arena, Hayate called. Both Sasuke and the Stone Genin started going down. Play it safe. Sasuke heard Naruto's voice from right behind him, before giving a thumbs up in understanding. As soon as they were both in the arena, Sasuke took the time before the match started to analyze his opponent. He was slightly taller than him with short and spiky brown hair and unusually cold red eyes, which seemed to size him up. He was dressed unusually for a ninja, wearing black pants and jacket all covered with small interconnected metallic plates. A lot of muscle, he probably relies on strength rather than speed, but that wicked staff of his might be a problem along with that armor. No telling what kind of jutsu he uses though. Glad with the info he gathered, Sasuke placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, ready to start the match. Mikashi took a similar stance with his staff. Begin. Both genin jumped back instantly. There were no taunts, no talking whatsoever as the battle began. Sasuke barely had the time to notice his opponent going through hand seals. It was too late to use the Sharingan to copy them or identify the jutsu. Earth release. Stone spikes, Mikashi shouted as he slammed his right palm into the ground while holding his staff above him with the other hand. Sasuke almost failed to jump and avoid the spikes that were now covering the entire arena floor apart from the small area where Mikashi was standing. Still floating in the air, he noticed that the spikes had receded back into the earth as his opponent charged and leapt towards him, using chakra to propel himself even faster. Activating his Sharingan, he started flashing through hand seals for a jutsu of his own. Fire release. Grand fireball, he cried as he exhaled the large orb of flame, aimed straight at his opponent who had leapt at him, hoping to take him while he was in the air. Up in the stands, Kakashi, Naruto and Sakura cheered on for their teammate as the fireball slammed into his opponent. Sasuke quickly landed on the ground and drew out his wakizashi, once more using his gloves to charge it with electricity. Mikashi hit the ground hard, but recovered quickly enough to parry the blow with his staff. Now for the first time, Sasuke had a chance to see the staff up close, and leapt back quickly when he noticed the seals on it glowing, barely avoiding the counter-attack that slammed into the ground. The cracks that appeared beneath the staff gave him a good idea as to why it wouldn't be healthy to get hit. If at first you don't succeed, he mused as he pulled out a dozen shuriken connected to ninja wire. He smirked as he started throwing them around, content that his opponent couldn't see the wire. The shuriken flew straight at his opponent, who decided to dodge rather than block them, much like he had anticipated. I didn't even charge them this time, and he still dodged. Now for the second salvo. Taking out 8 kunai, equally connected to wires, he started throwing them one by one as his opponent kept moving and dodging them. What Mikashi failed to notice was that Sasuke had been making a literal web of highly conductive ninja wire around him. Now, it was only a matter of him hitting a few of them and getting tangled up. Were all the Uchiha that pitiful? Mikashi asked in an arrogant tone as he prepared to charge his opponent. Sasuke suppressed the urge to charge at him, opting to wait and shock the bastard. Come on, you're just standing there, make this at least a bit more fun, he kept taunting. Back in the stands, only Naruto was still smirking, as he was the only one perfectly aware of what Sasuke was doing. Kakashi gave him an inquisitive look, to which he only responded with, "Watch and enjoy." The opportune moment finally arrived as Mikashi charged at Sasuke, who jumped to the side, literally entangling his foe in ninja wire. Drawing out the spool to which all of the wires were connected, he firmly grasped it with his right hand before pumping as much chakra as he could into the gloves. The results were immediate as the wire crackled with the electricity that surged through it and into Mikashi's body. Sasuke dropped on his knee as the exhaustion caught up with him. Thankfully, his plan worked, and thanks to the plates on him, the gloves shocked him even worse than they would have normally, if the smoke rising from his lightly burnt body was any indication. Proctor. I think he's unable to continue, Sasuke weakly said, catching the coughing man's attention. Right. Winner Sasuke Uchiha. The other members of Team 7 cheered for the victorious Uchiha as he climbed back up. Nice fight Sasuke, Naruto said in his now usual serious tone. His friend merely nodded as he sat down to see who was going to fight next. Once he saw the name, the raven-haired youth smiled. This was going to be fun. Naruto Uzumaki vs Tenten Higurashi. Now this is going to be entertaining, Kakashi jokingly noted. Guy threw him a surprised look. Wasn't Naruto your weakest student? He asked, while Kakashi threw back an eye smile. I might have forgotten to update his records, he lied. In truth, Naruto had asked him to keep them the way he was before the wave mission, with only some minimal updates so it would seem realistic, while he and the Hokage were kept perfectly aware of his skills via a second record that was kept safely on the old man's person at all times. Guy ruefully shook his head at his rival. But after that, Kakashi's expression turned serious. I hope you're trained her well, Guy, he said, for her sake. Down in the arena, Naruto and Tenten stared at each other as Hayate approached to start the match. Naruto was perfectly calm, unlike his opponent who seemed somewhat angry for some reason. Do you have an issue with me? He asked in his perfectly calm voice. However, he quickly put two and two together when he noticed the way she was eyeing his sword rather than watching him dismissively. So, she thinks I'm some idiot who got his hands on a strong sword and doesn't know how to use it, Asking the old man to keep my records a secret was a better idea than I thought. Do you even know how to hold a sword? She asked him, to which he only smiled as he placed one hand on the hilt of the once more bandaged blade, but quickly decided against it. I'd rather see how good you are first before deciding whether I'll need the sword, he added while he placed his hand on one of the seals on his belt. Begin. Hayate shouted before jumping back. Tenten leapt back as well while Naruto merely unsealed one of his special seal kunai, activating the chakra shell around it and using his molding skills to extend the blade a bit by adding his own chakra to it. He momentarily reminded himself of what he found out about his opponent. Higurashi Tenten, weapon specialist, no other notable skills apart from the academy ones. Known to carry a lot of weapons. This should prove interesting. Let's see how her aim goes against my radiance. Naruto kept his calm smile as he saw Tenten begin throwing a salvo of kunai. He stood perfectly calm until the kunai reached the edge of his sphere. He calmly closed his eyes as he sidestepped all 10 of them. With his free hand, he lowered his hitai over his eyes. Kakashi was now worried, but not for Naruto as Guy thought. Kakashi, what is that boy doing? Sigh. Thanks to his unconventional training, he has sharper reflexes than most Chunin, let alone Genin. Dodging and parrying 100 projectiles would be no challenge for him. Next to Kakashi, Sasuke was laughing. Sakura merely watched with a smile on her face. And to think he's not even using jutsu, a stoic Shino commented from the sides. He had seen Naruto in action once, and if nothing else, he certainly wasn't worried for the blonde. He knew how to take care of himself. In the arena, Naruto kept dodging wave after wave of weapons, until he finally decided to test his kunai in the usual variant. Focusing on an incoming kunai, he sliced straight at it, only to be surprised when the shell of chakra broke off from the blade and cut straight through the kunai, before flying off towards Tenten. That was unexpected, he thought out loud, causing many to sweat drop. On the other side, Tenten was getting worried as well. She had tried most of her tactics on her opponent and each and every one had failed. She had expected an idiot of an opponent, but he was no joke, in fact he was beating her blindfolded. I'm afraid you're at a disadvantage, Naruto tried to explain in his infuriatingly calm voice. Sasuke and Kakashi, along with a few others, recognized how this manner of speech perfectly resembled Itachi. You see, I've been training some of my skills by blocking or dodging vast numbers of projectiles at a time. So without going all out, you don't stand a chance of hitting me. Tenten silently cursed as she planned her next move. Naruto was apparently willing to wait for her. Well, that's gonna bite him in the back, she gingerly thought as she prepared 2 scrolls. Picking up the minute chakra signature of her scrolls, Naruto lifted one side of his Hitai-8, putting it very much like Kakashi, who in turn felt very proud of his student. Up in the stands, Shikamaru, Shino and Neji carefully studied Naruto's moves and tactics, each trying to figure out what the blonde enigma was doing. Out of them, Shino was the least surprised, but the only one who knew what the result of this match would be for sure was Shikamaru. She's going to lose badly, he quietly said. In the cage box, 3 figures watched Naruto's fight with great interest. Anko was enjoying herself, while Sarutobi merely watched the boy with pride. The only one who was amazed was Jiraiya, who hadn't expected that much skill from the boy. He was also the only one to notice the dome of chakra that covered the entire arena. The gaki is good, he muttered. You have no idea, Anko added while giggling, which promptly caused the two to take a step away from her. Scrolls? Naruto asked with very little emotion. Inside he was giddy to see another scroll technique at work. Tenten smirked at him, confident that her move would land at least a few blows. Just don't get surprised when it kills you, she added in a serious voice. Now very interested, Naruto lifted the other end from his eyes. He watched the girl pull out a small pair of scrolls, holding them both in one hand before unrolling in the air and smearing her blood on both. What's she gonna use? Chakra converters. Exploding seals. A ton of weapons. Damn, I wanna know. He's done for, trained or not. There's no way he can avoid that move, Guy confidently said, while Kakashi shook his head. He hasn't even begun to fight Guy. The scrolls instantly began releasing smoke and flew up in the air, quickly followed by Tenten. Secret technique. Twin rising dragons, she shouted as the 2 smoke dragons rose with her, only to glow brightly for a moment and unleash a veritable wall of metal heading straight in his direction. Naruto's eyes widened for a moment, he couldn't possibly block and dodge all of those with only the kunai. Cursing his bad judgment of his opponent, he quickly plunged a decent amount of his chakra into the sword on his back, the familiar sound of chakra shredding cloth signifying that the sword was free. The feedback from the field of radiance was incredible. There had to be hundreds. No, nearly 1,000 projectiles heading straight at him. Quickly funneling as much chakra as possible to his arms to increase speed, he started blocking each and every projectile. Damn, I didn't expect this many projectiles. Wait, what's this behind them? Wires. Shit. He mentally cursed as he began cutting down the fine assortment of shuriken, kunai, senbon. Even usually non-throwable weapons were added to the mix, which he found out as he sidestepped an oversized hammer. With every move, the shell of chakra around the Kubikiri Haucho kept shredding the ninja wire attached to the weapons, so that when the barrage was finally over, less than 100 projectiles still had their strings attached. Tenten tried pulling them up, but they too were soon disabled. She watched her opponent with newfound respect. He had blocked and dodged his way through her strongest attack with nothing but a giant sword. No jutsu whatsoever. How? She asked while getting up from the floor. Training. Lots and lots of downright scary training. The last time I tried blocking projectiles there were over 100 of them, so this is a new experience for me, he said with a small, but genuine smile, which soon vanished when he noticed the handle of a kama sticking out of his leg, the blade having pierced straight through. Cursing for a moment, he pulled it out, throwing the bloodied weapon aside as his hand was encompassed by green chakra. He can use medical jutsu as well. Kurenai asked Kakashi, now even more curious about the blonde. Frankly, I don't think there's an area he can't learn. Kakashi answered in his serious voice. Inside he was damn proud of the boy for showing all of them just how capable he was. The wound on his leg healed. Naruto decided it was time for a little showing off. Since you were kind enough to show me your technique with scrolls, it's only fair that I do the same, he said with a wide smile. Tenten suddenly felt the temperature drop by a few degrees. Up in the stands, Kakashi once more looked at the boy with wide eyes. He perfectly remembered what that move of his did to a fully trained enemy ninja. The girl wouldn't stand a chance if he hit her with it. He only hoped that Naruto knew what he was doing. Guy, remember when I told you that I hoped you trained her well? Yes. Guy said, asked. Well, the shit was about to hit the fan. He started fighting seriously, Kakashi nervously said. Tenten watched as Naruto pulled out a set of 3 scrolls, each of them in a different color. One was brown, the other white and the third red. The brown one was attached to a kunai. Ready, Tenten-san. This is not going to be pretty, 'cause I finally finished this move. She swallowed hard at his words as he began the sequence. He rapidly bit both his thumbs before throwing the red and white scrolls in the air, unfurling them in the process, and smearing his blood along both. A faint shimmer of blue was seen extending from the end of each scroll following to his extended thumbs as the scrolls rolled back up. In the meantime, Naruto started going through several hand seals at great speed, before slamming the third scroll into the ground. Secret Art. Triune Hunters. Once again, for a moment nothing happened as all but a few seemed disappointed. However, Naruto's team along with Team 8 and Neji all knew what was going on. Neji, thanks to his Byakugan and the others from experience. Tenten was simply nervous and worried as a strong pressure began building up, it being nothing more than a sudden release of a massive amount of chakra. However, the eyes of all of the spectators widened as the final effect of the jutsu became apparent as a trio of foxes manifested themselves from the elements. The first was a billowy white form that extended from the white scroll, visible only thanks to the color of the ground. The second was a flaming red fox with orange eyes, incredibly reminiscent of Kyuubi burst from the red one. And finally the third rose from the ground, completely brown, its hard earthen body devouring the third scrolls. Jiraiya watched, feeling like time had gone back to almost 30 years ago when Minato started learning to do seals. Naruto was just like him, practical, but very creative and capable of thinking outside the box. He felt ashamed for not being there for the boy and enraged at the stupidity of the villagers that harmed him. Jiraiya was perfectly aware that he was out there keeping those who would hunt down Naruto for the Kyuubi, but still he could only hope that the boy would find it in his heart to forgive him for not coming sooner. A life lived in hell wasn't truly worth much. The crowd stood quiet in shock as Naruto took the sword in his right hand and pointed it towards Tenten while the thin strands of chakra went from his left hand to the 3 foxes. Now, let's get this party started, he shouted, before smiling at his opponent. Tenten drew out a small scroll and unsealed a fine-looking katana from it, falling into a, to Naruto, unfamiliar stance. Do I play with her and humiliate her, or do I simply beat her down fast? Naruto pondered for a minute as a kunai with an exploding tag flew his way. Fast it is. He quickly charged forth, the massive sword not slowing him down in the least as he moved into the reach of his enemy's sword. Tenten tried to stab him before he managed to bring the sword down, but found that the brown fox was nowhere in sight, and that her sword was no longer moving. Looking down, she found the fox holding the sword down with its stone jaws clenched tightly around it. She closed her eyes, waiting for the blow that was about to come. Do you yield? Came a cold voice, but there was no pain. She opened her eyes. The massive blade of the Kubikiri Haucho was an inch from her neck and the remaining two foxes were aiming at her heart. But neither of those two was what scared her into silence. It was a pair of brutally cold and calculated eyes that stared at her. I asked, "Do you yield?" He repeated the question. Hi, she stuttered. In an instant, the coldness from both voice and eyes vanished, leaving a calm but happy face. She fell down to her knees, exhausted, while Naruto looked untouched by the match apart from a few holes in his clothes. Dismissing the elemental foxes, he picked the girl up along with her sword and carried her off to the stands above while Hayate shouted, "Winner Naruto Uzumaki." Up in the cage box, all three looked astonished at the blonde boy. All three could have sworn it was Minato Namikaze standing there 1 minute when he asked the question. There was no killing intent and it was still scary enough. Jiraiya was also impressed by the boy's knowledge of seals, as the three foxes were created by nothing more than a powerful seal or one he didn't know. Sarutobi-sensei, you didn't by any chance teach him that? He asked, not really expecting a positive answer. No, replied a downright happy Hokage, he made it himself with knowledge from a certain book I gave him. Jiraiya smiled for the boy. Sensei, have you told him about his? Not yet, but I intend to as soon as this part of the exam is over. It's about time he knew. Jiraiya sadly sighed. I think he'll give you a chance, Jiraiya. He's a lot smarter than anyone would have guessed, but he's still the kind boy all of us here have grown to love. Anko listened to the two talk, but for one reason or another, she had a rather good idea of whom they were talking about. Seriously, just remove the whisker mark and he's a spitting image of him. She also felt very proud of Naruto, and, although she'd never admit it, she was thinking about him a lot recently. She was also deeply surprised to feel jealous of the fact that he was carrying the weapon girl. Why the hell am I feeling jealous now? She'd have to talk to Kurenai about it, but for now cheering for the blonde Gaki's victory was something she was more than willing to do. Naruto walked up the stands carrying Tenten before putting her down safely. As soon as he did that, his team moved in to congratulate him. But before he did anything, he held his hand to the girl. It's been a fun match. He started running the back of his head while smiling sheepishly. Would you mind sparring from time to time? He asked in a very happy voice. Tenten looked at him strangely, but only nodded before smiling at herself and shaking his hand. If anything, she had to admit that his smile was infectious. Guy took care of his student before nodding respectfully to Naruto, who simply smiled as he rejoined his team and received the due congratulations. He was, after all, going to the finals. Before finally settling down to watch the next match, Naruto looked at the aged Kage and his two companions who were both cheering for him, and as much as he was happy for making the old man proud, something about Anko's smiling made his heart flutter. So friends, this was episode 2 of this thrilling alternate universe adventure. If you enjoyed it and want episode 3 soon, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down your thoughts. Which powerful technique should Naruto master next under Anko's guidance, and who should be his first major opponent? I'll see you in the next episode.